He said that Vance's plan for peace was too radical. Well, who's driving the ship right now? It would be Ukraine's number one benefactor.
Welcome to RealClearPolitics on SiriusXM for Wednesday, February 12th. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined today by Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief, and Phil Wegmann, our White House reporter. Gentlemen, so there was news made let's start with last night's press conference that was held in the Oval Office, and then we'll talk a little bit about today's press conference in the White House briefing room. Phil, you were there. But let's talk about last night. Elon Musk showed up in the Oval Office with Donald Trump and his, I think, 4-year-old son, who's quite cute and played around. And as his father explained to the press, took questions and explained to the press what they're doing at DOGE. Phil, what's going on? Why did they do this? Why was this necessary for Elon Musk to make this kind of appearance?
So the news hook here was that President Trump was going to be signing an executive order to make it easier for DOGE to remake the federal workforce. Elon Musk was there in the Oval Office for that ceremony. And I think that the reason why the administration brought him in front of the press was because here you have the most consequential lieutenant of Donald Trump right now, someone who, like I said, is remaking the federal administrative state in real time. And this was one of the first opportunities for reporters to really press him on questions of why are you doing what you're doing and how. That said, I think that the big headline here, whether you agree with what Musk is doing or you don't, is that Donald Trump sees DOGE as an extension of his campaign promises. He is telling the country this is what he ran on and this is what he's going to be doing.
Carl, clearly, Elon Musk has been portrayed in the media and by the Democrats as this villainous figure who's just running roughshod over sort of willy-nilly through these departments, cutting stuff left and right, illegally, unaccountably, and not transparently.
Oh, and not to mention giving Nazi salutes. Yeah.
Well, that was before. but so do you think he the offensive, going public and answering, taking press questions in the Oval, do you think that helped his cause? And how do you think that went? And how do you think the public received it?
Tom, it's hard to know how people are going to see this. Elon Musk has become something. He's become something of a Rorschach test. I mean, people who really dislike him, looked at that and thought, okay, here's the richest man in the world with the most powerful man in the world. It's all about billionaires throwing their weight around and being ham-handed. On the other hand, if you like what they're doing and you like Trump, you like Musk, you thought, well, 4-year-old kid was certainly cute. And Elon Musk what he said is right. Trump ran on this stuff. He's doing it. But it's hard to change minds right now in American politics. But you and I were looking at that, Tom, and there were some things, Trump made a point of sitting behind the Resolute desk. And sometimes, in corporate power structures, the guy in charge would be standing and the other guy would be sitting. But Time magazine had that, infamous cover with Elon Musk behind the Resolute desk. So Trump didn't budge. The signal was saying, I'm the president, the buck stops here. And so I thought that was effective for them. And the other thing, the 4-year-old, I thought he really humanized Elon Musk. The kid was fidgeting. At one time, at one point, he was picking his nose. Another time, Musk puts him on his shoulders, and Musk can't hear a question from the press because the kid stuck his fingers in his father's ears, and Musk comment on it. And he really loves that kid. One other thing, I don't know if you noticed this, Tom. You're not old enough to remember it, but I do. John F. Kennedy sat behind that desk, and at one point, John, his only son, crawled under the desk where the president's feet go, and a White House photographer caught it. A very famous and moving picture. All this more so after John F. Kennedy was killed, and for me even more so because I knew John Jr. when he died in a plane crash. It was just a poignant thing. And at one point, the kid didn't crawl under the desk, but between Trump's legs, but he was beside the desk and he had that same pose. I think John was 3 when his father was killed, and this boy's 4. But I kind of gasped when I saw it. It took me all the way back to Kennedy. So in that sense, I think Donald Trump cannot be harmed by this, nor Elon Musk by being humanized. I think that's probably an important thing for them.
Bill, what about the bromance? I mean, what's the
Hmm.
word of the White House? Carl mentions this time cover, and obviously over the last few years, we've learned that the fastest way to get on Donald Trump's bad side is to sort of outshine him in the press. Elon Musk is certainly doing that to a certain degree. But what do your sources tell you at the White House? How's the bromance going?
The bromance is good.
Carl says it's over by Valentine's Day, which is in 2 days. I don't think you're going to win that bet, pal.
The over
I
under.
mean, Elon Musk, I think, got brushed off the plate a little bit when he publicly criticized Sam Altman, who was partnering with this administration on AI. And certainly, when we look at Musk and his empire, a number of his businesses are intertwined with the administration, whether you're talking SpaceX or Tesla or Starlink. I mean, this guy has used the federal government to keep his businesses afloat. And I'm not saying there's anything nefarious there, but it does create perhaps a conflict of interest. Trump is not worried about that, and Trump thus far, is not worried about some of the criticism from Democrats or the press who have taken to jokingly referring to the head of DOGE as President Musk. He doesn't mind because I think what we've seen thus far is that everything that Musk is doing is more or less in line with what Donald Trump wants. And by the way, Musk has been setting up some of these 80-20 fights that you hear a lot from, Trump's orbit. They say that what Musk is doing is creating a fight over things like U.S. aid, where 80% of the public is on the side of the administration, that they want to get rid of this pesky government agency, and then 20% of the public is on the other side. So long as Elon Musk keeps, creating opportunities for the president and he doesn't, shine too brightly, I think Trump keeps him around.
Hey, Tom,
Carl,
can I
you're
say
good.
one thing about that? 'Cause
Of course.
Trump, Phil's covered the White House for us with distinction. I covered that beat for 15 years. You heard some of this when Dick Cheney was vice president and George W. Bush was president, that Cheney's really the president. Well, if you've ever been in the White House, if you've worked there, if you've covered it, those kind of comments come from outside. Nobody who's in that building has any illusions. The president's the president, and even Joe Biden, who was diminished. I mean, there was, you know, Kamala Harris wasn't the president. Joe Biden wasn't the president. We talked about that, but the power resides in the Oval Office, and I mean, to put it very bluntly, Donald Trump can make Elon Musk go away. Elon Musk cannot make Donald Trump go away, and both men know that, and I think most of the people around them know that as well.
And here I thought you were going to offer me a culpa, Carl, but instead.
No, I'll wait till February 15th.
Still holding out hope. I don't think you're going to win that bet. All right, let's shift gears and talk about the press conference today. Phil, you were just there. You asked a couple of questions and follow-ups to Caroline Leavitt. She talked about DOGE. She got questions about DOGE and what happened last night. What did you make of the press conference? What was the atmosphere like in the room?
So these press conferences are very helpful, even when you get to see the president on a regular basis, because they clear out the sort of underbrush of news, some of the things that might not necessarily make headlines, but that as a reporter, you need to know. And one of the things that we saw the press really push Caroline on was this claim from Elon Musk of fraud occurring in the federal government. And what we learned is that this administration has a pretty expansive view when it comes to fraudulent money spent. And their argument is that if it's wasteful, then that sort of falls underneath the category of fraud. And we'd heard from Elon Musk, for some time now that the government is replete with this sort of stuff. And this was an opportunity for her to push back. But, that was not the news of the day. The news of the day was that Donald Trump had announced that he just had a conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, and that shortly afterwards he had had a conversation with Ukrainian President Zelensky. All of us are trying to figure out, how is this peace deal going to come together? What are the contours of these negotiations? Because in Europe, we just heard from Defense Secretary Hegseth, who said that Ukrainian membership in NATO was off the table. So now all of us in the coming, days and weeks ahead, we're trying to get our arms around this very fast moving news.
Carl, what about that? I mean, that was the big news, obviously. Trump released a post on Truth Social saying that he had had this very productive phone call. He's very flattering and to Putin, saying that that Putin had repeated Trump's phrase that this is common sense. They want the war to end. All of this needless death. He said he was assigning Marco Rubio and a few other members of his team to get this done and get it done quickly. He said during the campaign he would put an end to this war in 24 hours. Obviously, that was a bit of hyperbole. We're now 3 weeks into the administration, but it looks like this is starting to happen. What do you expect? Will this be over quickly, or is this something that's going to drag on for a while?
Well, I don't know. I was struck by what Pete Hegseth said. Basically, it took NATO. He sounded like he could have been Vladimir Putin talking about NATO and Ukraine. And my first thought was that this is a very odd way to negotiate. You're giving up going into these discussions what is most important to Vladimir Putin. But then my second thought was maybe they're further along in these negotiations than we realize, and that there already is the outlines of a deal. I think we'll find out in the coming days. President said something quite bizarre the day before. He said, yeah, maybe someday Ukraine will be Russian, and people went batshit in Ukraine. But even then, there were some people, Ukrainians, who said, well, he thinks aloud. I saw a story, AFP, he thinks aloud, and maybe he's just negotiating. So the whole world is kind of on Donald Trump now, and not in a bad way. I mean, they know he's just going to says things that no other president would say. But Tom, if they have this deal, if what we're hearing from the administration is right, and Phil, correct me if you have a different impression, Ukraine's going to have to give up some territory, and NATO's off the table now in writing, but Russia will, I guess, acknowledge Ukraine's sovereignty and withdraw its troops. That seems to be, and nobody's told us this, but judging on these comments, that's what I'm inferring.
And rewind to what we heard from Zelensky last when he discussed Vice President J.D. Vance, who was then a candidate. He said that Vance's plan for peace was too radical. Well, who's driving the ship right now? It would be Ukraine's #1 benefactor. And my question to the White House today, at a moment when it seemed that the administration was taking NATO off the table, and when it does seem that there's going to be territory swaps, Ukraine has troops in Russia, Russia obviously has troops in Ukraine. We'll see where the border gets drawn in the end. My question was, all right, well, Zelensky has said that what he would like after the war is either NATO membership or nuclear weapons. We've heard that NATO is off the table. What about, nuclear weapons? There was no clarity on that one. But something that, a lot of my sources are very interested in is this question of whether or not there's going to be a role for the Europeans at the negotiation table at a moment when the White House is pushing Europe to take a bigger piece of responsibility for securing that continent. And what I heard from the press secretary today was that she didn't have a readout on any other nations besides Russia, the United States, and Ukraine. So all of that to say, we have a lot more questions than we do have answers. But I share Cannon's suspicion. Maybe this thing is farther along than we know publicly.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP. In discussion today with Carl Cannon, our Washington bureau chief and executive editor. Mr. Cannon, some other news this morning that's worth mentioning and talking about is the inflation number. And it came out today, showed that inflation is at 3%, which ticked up and remains stubbornly high. This is one of obviously the biggest issues in the campaign, Carl. It's something that Trump said he would handle immediately.
Well, it's something Biden said he had handled. Remember, he said inflation's done, it's over. Turns out it wasn't, was it?
It wasn't, although he brought it down from, what was it at the height of the post-pandemic? It was like 9.4, got down to about 2.5, has been bouncing around, and
been up. But inflation's been steadily up for the last 4 months. It's a pretty bad going away president that Biden left Trump.
Well, I mean, and that's the question. Is this, I suspect if you did a poll today and said who's more responsible for inflation, Donald Trump or Joe Biden, Democrats would probably say Donald Trump, but
That's right.
certainly Republicans would say Biden. I suspect independents would say Biden. at least for the next month or two, at which point, at some point, Donald Trump is going to own this economy and own the inflation, but I just don't know that we're there yet. But to your point, not a great number.
By spring. I mean, but Trump he wants to do all these things, and inflation is not going to help him. Now, what we don't know is what is all the stuff we talked about in the previous segment with Elon Musk cutting the government spending. Is that going to we're going to start to see that affect the financial markets? Is it going to affect inflation? You know, what's it going to do? Is it going to instill confidence or the lack thereof? The deficit, I mean, these $2 trillion deficits, we're running that, you know, annually. When Ronald Reagan left office, I mean, the national debt was like 2 trillion. We thought, or at the end of his first term, we thought that was unsustainable. Now we're doing that every year. And so it seems to me that what Trump's doing this winter will affect all these numbers one way or the other.
Well, Elon Musk posted something on X earlier saying that, yeah, this is going to help benefit the economy, and you'll see it reflected in interest rates, et cetera, et cetera. But that is the question, right? The Fed is probably going to be less eager to lower rates as inflation remains stubbornly high.
That's right. That's right.
So,
and
also, and that's not good for you know, I think Trump wants to get rates down.
Yeah, and here would be the benefit, well, to the country and to the administration of having lower interest rates. The money the government spends every year to service the interest on the debt, which is now one of the largest expenditures the government spends every year, will go down. Mortgage rates will go down, and then you'll see more people moving. We have this stagnant housing economy now. You'll see more houses being built. You'll see credit card rates come down. Presumably, people will buy more cars. There's just a lot of things that will happen if the interest rate comes down. And that was the other problem. Even in the administration, even when the Biden administration, when inflation got under control, the interest rate didn't come under control. And so it turns out, I mean, we've learned this in the last administration. The interest rate turns out to be a very important political factor.
Very important. Touches everybody every single day, you know, right. Particularly folks who are working class and
or on fixed incomes.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, listen, we've got 5 minutes left, and I want to say, I know you could do 5 hours on this, but I'm giving you 5 minutes because this is a favorite of yours. It is someone's birthday today, and someone who I know you hold in high esteem. So go to town. Tell us whose birthday it is and why it's important to the country.
It's Lincoln's birthday, Abraham Lincoln, and our greatest president. You know, there are all these polls on presidents, and some of them are pretty crazy. The American Political Science Association has Biden ranked ahead of Reagan. I mean, you know, literally. And it turns out that most the people who responded to their query were liberal academics. You know,
right?
Democrats.
Of course.
And there's, you know, but in every survey, and Al Felsenberg wrote a book about how we judge presidents. C-SPAN does a pretty well-respected survey, but always Lincoln is first or second, always. In every.
What made him so great, Carl?
And it's either George Washington, every once in a while Roosevelt pops into second place, but he's usually in third place. What made him great was well, first of all, he was a wartime commander-in-chief, you know, like Roosevelt. That's okay. And the Union won that war. He kept the country together. He ended slavery. He didn't have a hint of personal scandal. This is a guy whose nickname, long before he was in politics, was Honest Abe. These stories that you teach, that you're taught, even as a kid, you think they're apocryphal. You know, he shortchanged when he was a clerk in the store some person by 3 cents. Now, 3 cents there would be probably like $10 now, but still, he walks a mile to give the guy his change. All these things. Turned out a friend of mine, William Lee Miller, who's gone now, he wrote a book called Lincoln's Virtues. And all these things that we associate with Lincoln, they're true. He's an honorable and honest person. He was also our most eloquent and articulate president. And I wrote in my column today, I was probably too puckish about it and irreverent, but I said, you know, no one has ever mistaken Donald Trump or Joe Biden for Lincoln when it comes to presidential rhetoric. But look, that's a high bar. Nobody's ever. And these phrases that the people use, not even knowing where they come from, better angels are better angels, the better angels of our nature. You know, we must not be enemies. We must be friends. This is Lincoln talking at a time when the country is literally at war with itself. People are dying. Hundreds of thousands of people died in the Civil War. And Lincoln maintained that even among that carnage, we had to think of ourselves as one people. And because of his presidency and because of his martyrdom, we did, even when it was over.
Well, I know, Carl, I know that a lot of things are attributed to him correctly, but a lot are attributed to him incorrectly. And you've made sort of a cottage industry out of like sniffing out all of the fake Lincoln quotes that are out there.
Yeah, well, I wasn't the first. That Fehrenbach, an academic, and his wife wrote this book, and it attributes quotes to Lincoln, and it examines all the quotes going back 150 years, that Lincoln never said. He's like Mark Twain in that regard, but he really did say these things at the second inaugural address about how we must remember, we must not be enemies. We must be friends. He says this in a country where people are fighting and dying by this tens of thousands. And we have this country now where we're at each other's throats over politics in a way that sometimes it has slipped into violence. The rhetoric is violent. The hatred is real. The inability to compromise or even see the other side as decent is endemic. Polls showing a shocking number of Americans think that violence, saying that they think political violence is acceptable if your side loses an election or your side is on the wrong side of an issue. This is the time when we need to channel Lincoln, and we need to remember who we are and take a step back from these battles, And look, some of these issues are real, Tom. You and I talk about them every day, but a person who thinks that the top income tax rate should be 40% and another person thinks it should be 33%. Those are not people who should hate each other over this issue. And Lincoln stands as a reminder of this, of who we can be and who we need to be.
All right. Well, on that inspiring note, Mr. Cannon, we are going to take another quick break. We will be back with more Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM right after this.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and my next guest is James Freeman. He is assistant editor at the Wall Street Journal's editorial page, and he's the author of the Best of the Web column. James, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here.
So you had this piece in the Journal about Elizabeth Warren and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. She was instrumental in setting this up. Donald Trump is going after the Bureau. It appears there is little she can do, in large part because of the way it was designed in the first place. So just tell our listeners, our viewers, what is the CFPB and what's going on?
Yeah, thanks. This is one of those be careful what you wish for stories. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, as you recall, it was set up in the 2010 Dodd-Frank law after the great financial crisis, or a financial crisis, as some people call it. So it was kind of an odd creation right from the start. There were already lots of financial regulators, but she said we need another one. And except this one is going to be different. It's not going to worry about the safety and soundness of financial institutions, which is pretty dangerous in a financial regulator. But also the big issue was she wanted to insulate it from political control.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this happened in 2010, and Democrats, I think rightly at the time, were thinking there's going to be a political pushback coming soon. They were doing Obamacare, they were doing this Dodd-Frank law, a lot of regulation. That was the Tea Party movement. So they kind of figured that their majorities were not going to last forever. Maybe their hold on the White House not going to last all that much longer either. So she designed it basically, and it was passed by Congress, signed by President Obama, to be largely independent, to the point where it doesn't, unlike every other agency just about, it doesn't have to go to Congress to get appropriations. It just draws money from the Federal Reserve up to a certain formula. But basically, as much as the director of this bureau wants, up to that statutory limit.
So I want to sort of focus on that for a second, because that is, I don't think people, who've been in Washington a long time, I can't think of another agency that does this. It draws its money down, so it almost has like a blank check, and it's from the Federal Reserve,
Yeah,
not from Congress.
yeah,
So there's, in essence, is there any congressional oversight? Is there a way for Congress to sort of check in on what's going on? Whether you're Democrat or Republican,
yeah.
you would think that good governance might say, hey, maybe there should be some elected official who has
Yeah.
some idea of what these bureaucrats are doing.
Yeah, I mean, there is congressional oversight, but unlike, as you said, typical agencies, they don't really have to pay attention to it, because the normal process is there's congressional oversight. Our elected officials, the people that we chose, get to ask, what are you doing with the money? Question whether it's being spent in the right way. And then the agencies essentially have to persuade Congress to appropriate their budgets every year. This is different. Now, there are a few other regulators that at least partly fund themselves through fees, essentially taxes on the industries they regulate, that sort of thing. And that applies to some of the financial regulators. But this phenomenon of not having to deal with Congress for money and being able to draw at will up to it's 12% of the Fed's operating expenses. And then there's an inflation formula as well. So now it's more than $800 million a year. The director of this bureau can just grab at will without having to get anyone's approval. And that is a unique creation, I believe.
Almost $1 billion a year.
Yeah.
With no congressional oversight. So, okay, so that I guess that's good, as long as you like what the Bureau is doing. Tell us what the Bureau's been up to. And again, the Democrats will point to this and say this freedom that this agency has insulates it from political influence and allows them to really represent the consumer's interest. I think that would be sort of the rationale,
yes.
right? Yeah. So what pelts have they put on the wall? They must have done something here.
Yeah, in terms of impact of the Bureau, I mean, it's hard to tell. Obviously, a lot of harassment of businesses, and certainly you can give financial companies a really hard time if you don't have to worry about the impact on their business, on the solvency of the bank, what have you. If you can demand things, whether or not they're economically viable, that gives you a lot of freedom as a regulator. I mean, you look at auto loans and so forth. I guess they would say they have acted on behalf of the consumer. Other people would say they've added a lot of cost and complexity in those markets. But whether they do a good job or a bad job, it doesn't really matter. And people will probably not be surprised to learn that since they get to decide their funding, at least up to that limit, their budget has been growing faster than other financial regulators in recent years. Again, having no accountability is nice. You don't have to sort of justify your existence to congressional appropriators. And now it's just this sort of ultimate irony where Russ Vought, who's the Trump budget director, now the acting director of this bureau, has decided not to draw money anymore. And Senator Warren is infuriated that this is beyond her power to address. And of course, the reason it's beyond her power is because she created it that way and persuaded Barack Obama and the Congress to enact it.
So the jujitsu move here is the Vought, who is the new OMB director, names himself the head of the Bureau, which I guess is within his, I guess
he hasn't named himself. The president has selected him. But yes, he is also serving as the acting Bureau director. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So Trump names him as OMB. Then Vought names himself to be head of the Bureau. And then he looks at the Bureau and says, you know what, we don't need this $780,000 or whatever. He's turning back to the Federal Reserve, I guess. And as you say, because the way this was set up to insulate it from Congress, a senator has no real ability to reach in and do anything about this. I guess it's ironic, or it's payback or something, but what's plan B? I mean, the Democrats aren't going to just give up on this, I assume.
I mean, I don't think they have one in for the long haul. I think in the short term, I would assume they can find a sympathetic judge to try and get in the way of this. Ultimately, I think they lose because of the way they wrote the law to ensure that senators could not mess with the Bureau. And I think it's, whether Elizabeth Warren is going to say, maybe I shouldn't create unaccountable bureaucracies again, I don't know. But I think for anyone, it maybe, and this is, I think, one virtue of the second Trump term here is questions, good questions being asked about the function of these so-called independent agencies, which over the years have sprouted up in Washington. And it's very hard to figure out how they fit within the Constitution. It's a creation that's not, as we said, not really accountable for funding to Congress. It also is insulated in some ways from the rest of the executive branch in terms of a sole director having an enormous amount of discretion. The president can remove the bureau director under certain circumstances, but it's a lot of power for someone who was not elected. And I think you're going to see that, I would hope, a kind of a rethinking of getting back to the constitutional way, which is that you have a legislative branch and a judicial branch and an executive branch, and you don't really want to create hybrid creatures that aren't accountable in the constitutional design to any of them.
We've talked a lot on the show about this, whether there is a looming constitutional crisis coming up with these sorts of questions, and this is sort of a specific agency in a specific way. So I that's why I was so interested in talking to you about it. I'm talking to James Freeman, by the way. He's from the Wall Street Journal. He's written this fascinating piece about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But how do you view the larger question of this fight that's coming down, it looks, between the executive and the Congress about who, once money is appropriated, who gets to decide how it's spent?
Well, that's there is going to be that larger fight about impoundment, the ability of the president to choose not to spend money that has been appropriated by Congress. Now, this fight we've just been talking about is maybe the easier one for Team Trump because thanks to Senator Warren, she created this beast to be unaccountable. But there is a larger throughout the government question of, does the president have the authority to just choose not to spend on executive branch agencies that have been funded by Congress because he thinks it's wasteful, unnecessary, what have you. There was during the last days of Nixon, toward the last days of Nixon, there was a law passed which says the president cannot choose not to spend. But I think this may come under Supreme Court challenge during this administration, because there is quite a body of legal work to say this is not constitutional. I don't think it's ever really been seriously challenged, and it should be, to clarify what the powers of the executive are versus the legislature.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief, Real Clear Politics, talking now with George Condon, who's the White House correspondent for National Journal. Place I used to work, I covered White House for National Journal. I think between George and I don't know, it's like John Dingell in the Michigan Senate. John and Debbie Dingell, we've had it forever, George. Thanks for joining us. You had a piece, an essay today. It's not quite a column. It's not quite a straight news story, so I'll call it an essay. It was a nice magazine piece about Donald Trump's revenge tour. Is that what you're calling it?
Well, I mean, what's interesting to me is that the very first promise he made, really, in the second campaign, or third campaign, I guess it is, was when he went to CPAC, and then he had his first rally. was retribution. I am your retribution. And so we're keeping track of not policy differences, but when he goes after individuals that he believes crossed him. And it's been pretty remarkable. This is our third, the one we ran today was our third installment of it, and he hasn't been president that long.
No, but you have a nice conceit, George, that he's Don Corleone, he's Michael Corleone. And for those of you who have never seen Godfather 2, first of all, you need to see that. It's one of the greatest films, American films ever made. Secondly, there's this great scene in Michael, the Godfather, tells us, that nothing bad will happen to his brother who's betrayed him while his mother is still alive. Well, they're at the funeral of his mother, and these people are starting to kill people all over this, from Lake Tahoe to New York, people who crossed Corleone, and some of them are spectacular hits. One guy's, he's in the barber's chair and he's shot through the eye. His brother's shot on Lake Tahoe fishing. Another guy, they jam a screwdriver or something in a revolving door. And it's just this series of revenge killings of people who crossed Michael Corleone. And now Donald Trump isn't killing people, but he certainly is settling scores, isn't he?
Oh, absolutely. And it's a pretty long list. We're up to about 20 on our retribution list. Some of whom, you understand why he's angry, but some of them, for example, firing the archivist of the United States, who wasn't even there when the archives were trying to get the classified documents back.
You're talking about calling Shogun.
To do with it.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, you're listening to George Condon, White House correspondent for National Journal. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington bureau chief of RealClearPolitics. So, but if I'm wrong, am I wrong about this? Colleen Shogan sort of curried favor with Melania Trump, invited her some event. She sort of saw the way this was going, but it wasn't enough to protect her.
I think you're right. You're right on that. But I mean, she wasn't confirmed until 2023, and the search of Mar-a-Lago was long before that. But he remembers the institution, and he wants to have control of all these things. I mean, one of my favorites is none of us saw it coming on the Kennedy Center, taking control of that. No president has thought to do that. But you go back to 2017 when Norman Lear was one of the Kennedy Center honorees.
Lionel Richie, I think, maybe.
Yeah. But Norman Lear and a choreographer also said, we're going to boycott the White House reception before we go over to the Kennedy Center.
Yeah, and they made it sound like they wouldn't even accept the award if they, if Trump was there. They look. Here's the thing about Trump, George, and I find this out. I keep relearning this lesson. So he'll say something, and my first reaction will say, "Well, there's no way that happened," or that is so weird. But it turns out there's something there. They embarrassed the president the first time. They went out of their way to grandstand. I mean, this is his standpoint. In other words, we can fault him for being petty or taking these things too far, but they don't come out of nowhere. They're not imagined slights, is what I'm saying.
Oh no, and he remembers them. I mean, he is still mad that in the Emmy race between The Amazing Race and The Apprentice, that The Amazing Race won, and he remembers the people at the Academy who celebrated that, and he still to this day says that was a rigged election in the Emmy Awards.
Well, it's funny. This was on Air Force. I guess was it on Air Force One that he was asked about the Kennedy Center, what he had against the Kennedy Center. He said, "Oh, terrible shows. I hate those shows." And so he said, "Well, have you ever been to the Kennedy Center?" I said, "No, I haven't." It was something like Out of the Onion, but
right.
All right. And then he goes on, they have these terrible shows, these drag shows. And I thought, well, Kennedy Center doesn't have drag queens. Well, but they do. And this is my point. There's always something there that we didn't know was going on.
Well, but
I'm not saying he should fire the board, appoint himself chairman of the board. I don't even know if he has the statutory authority. I'm not excusing this, but these people who went around for 8 or 9 years, just crapping on this guy and abusing him. I don't know what they thought would happen. Maybe they thought he wouldn't win re-election, but am I wrong to think some of these people sort of got what was coming to them, or am I bending over backwards too far?
Well, but you come back to the fact he's president, and you're supposed to rise above personal grievances. This some of this is very petty. I mean, taking down the portraits at the Pentagon of a former Secretary of Defense and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and then covering over the hole in the wall to pretend there was never a picture there. That's petty. Some of them, though, you don't laugh about, are just callous and cruel. I mean, you have 3 individuals who are under death threats from Iran because of actions they did for President Trump, the killing Soleimani, and you take away their protection. That's beyond petty. That's something that is really going to.
What's he thinking there? Because that surprised me too.
Oh, the thought process is simple. They opposed me. John Bolton wrote a book that said bad things about me. Mike Pompeo did not endorse me.
Yeah, but see, Pompeo, but Pompeo and Bolton are in different categories to me.
They are.
Pompeo was Secretary of State. He never had a crossword with Trump while he was in office. He actually helped save Trump. Trump made a bad appointment initially, or that's too strong, an appointment that didn't work out. It wasn't a good fit. Pompeo came in, was very loyal. He didn't run against Donald Trump. He thought about it.
Right.
He thought about running for president. That seems to be his sin.
The reason for his opposition to Pompeo, Pompeo was the heavy front runner to be Secretary of Defense in this term. Tucker Carlson went to Donald Trump and lobbied vigorously against Pompeo, calling him a neocon, and he's going to get us into wars, and he's not really for you. So this particular one is Tucker Carlson's doing.
But what do you do when it's so that he replaces our mutual friend Mike Abramowitz at Radio Voice of America, or allegedly, and says it's going to go to Kerry Lake. Then Richard Grenell tweets a storm. So why do we even have Voice of America? And Elon Musk says it should be gone. So now are they starting to turn on each other? And if you use your analogy that he's like the mafia, are these the young capos killing each other?
Well, it's a feeding frenzy for who can destroy more of government, and that comes into play there. I mean, Elon Musk said Europe is completely free. There's no need for it or not, and it shows a lack of understanding of what the institutions do. Yeah,
well, some of these government agencies come into being. Voice of America and Radio Free Europe came in, in the aftermath of World War II, actually during World War II, to get our message out to the world. There was no free press, once you got, I don't know, west or east of Paris, anywhere, all the way to the Bering Sea. So it made sense. If someone wanted to make a rational case and said, maybe in the new technology, this agency no longer needs to be in existence, somebody should make the case. The president would make an argument. He would go to the powers that be in Congress. Right. He'd say, here's what I think. We can phase it out. We'll find people jobs. There's a way to do that. I think we don't have to have every government agency we've ever had, but to do it by tweet, or whatever they're calling these, a tweet on X. Is that the right? I guess right. Tweet's still the verb. Right. I don't really understand the thinking there. There's a contempt for the federal workforce that seems to permeate this administration and all of sort of MAGA world that doesn't get challenged very often. By Democrats it does, but from within, because it doesn't seem. I've said this all week on our radio show. There's a lack of humanity there that I find disconcerting.
Well, that's very true. But I keep coming back to the lack of understanding of what they do. And I learned a lesson on Voice of America when went with President Reagan to China in 1984. And the star of the press corps, the one all the Chinese wanted to meet, was the Voice of America reporter, Philomena Jury. And so many of them kept coming up and saying, we learned English by listening to you, we learned what American system is. And, you know, most of us had no idea that all that was going on. You've got to learn what these institutions do.
Well, now you cover the White House, George. That's be the last question. Is there anybody in the administration who has Donald Trump's here who can talk to him this way, who can make some of these cases and say, listen, you know, without, I'm not trying to undermine Elon Musk, this person could say, but you know, let's go slow in this area, and here's why. Just talk to him about the merits of some of these policies.
The answer is yes, there are people that could say that to him, but the most important answer is there isn't anybody who wants to.
Mhm.
These are not institutionalists. These are disruptors in there. He has the team he wants, and they are yes men and women to the core.
Well, okay. So another day, another agency, another board. You've been listening to George Condon, White House correspondent for National Journal, and it's for the institutional memory of another institution, the White House Correspondents Association. I don't know that Donald Trump didn't go to our dinner, George, and I don't guess he'll go this year. I'm Carl Cannon, Washington Bureau Chief of RealClearPolitics. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same station.